When 56-year-old Clara Mae stepped off the dusty platform in Laramie, Wyoming, she carried nothing but a weathered carpet bag and a letter promising marriage to a widowed rancher. What she discovered instead was humiliation that cut deeper than any prairie wind could ever reach. The man who had summoned her across a continent, Marcus Thornfield, took one long look at her petite frame and shook his head as if she were livestock that had failed to meet his exacting standards. "You're considerably smaller than I anticipated," he declared, disappointment dripping from every carefully measured word. "I specifically requested a sturdy woman in my correspondence, someone capable of handling demanding ranch work, not someone who might break under the first sign of pressure." Clara Mae attempted to explain that strength manifested itself in many different forms, that her hands remained steady from 30 years of meticulous seamstress work, that her spirit had weathered storms he couldn't possibly imagine. But Marcus had already reached his final decision with the cold efficiency of a businessman closing an unsuccessful deal. "I'll make arrangements for your return passage immediately," he announced, tipping his hat with frigid politeness. "This arrangement simply won't suffice for my needs." Left abandoned in the red dust with nowhere to turn and no one to call upon, Clara Mae believed her dreams of beginning a new life had crumbled like autumn leaves beneath an unforgiving boot. But sometimes salvation arrives from the most unexpected places, wearing the most unlikely faces. Watching from the shadows of the cattle pen stood Gabriel Rivers, a towering gentle giant whose weathered hands spoke eloquently of honest work, and whose pale blue eyes held depths of understanding that few men in this harsh territory possessed. When he witnessed her quiet dignity, maintained even in the face of such cruel rejection, something profound stirred in his weathered soul, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both known the sting of loneliness. The arduous journey to Wyoming territory had consumed 3 precious weeks of Clara Mae's life and depleted her last remaining savings. Now standing completely alone on the weathered planks of the depot platform, she wondered desperately if she had made the greatest mistake of her entire existence. Her carpet bag contained everything she held sacred in this world: her mother's silver thimble, needles sharp enough to pierce the finest silk, spools of thread in every shade imaginable, and the small leather pouch containing her grandmother's precious pearl buttons. These were the tools that had sustained her in London's unforgiving East End until the relentless factory machines arrived and rendered skilled seamstresses like herself completely obsolete. She had been somebody once, a person of consequence and respect. Clara Mae's fine alterations had earned a sterling reputation for exceptional quality work throughout the neighborhood. But when mass-produced, ready-made clothing flooded the market with ruthless efficiency, her loyal customers vanished like morning mist before the rising sun. The matrimonial agency's letter had arrived on the exact same day as her final eviction notice. Fate's particularly cruel joke played upon a woman who had already endured more than her fair share of hardship. Marcus Thornfield had been waiting at the platform precisely as promised in his correspondence. Medium height, prematurely gray hair, hands that clearly spoke of ranch work and outdoor labor. But when she had stepped down from the train car with hopeful anticipation, he had assessed her with the cold calculation of a cattle buyer at auction. "You're smaller than I expected," he had stated, his voice flat with unmistakable disappointment. "I specifically requested a sturdy woman in my letters, someone who could handle demanding ranch work, help with the cattle operations, not someone who would likely get trampled by an angry bull on her first day." That devastating encounter had occurred yesterday. She had spent the long, cold night on a depot bench, using her carpet bag as an uncomfortable pillow, listening to trains whistle their way toward destinations she would never see. Laramie was all dust and desperate ambition in 1885, with buildings sprouting from the prairie like determined weeds, streets bustling with cowboys and merchants moving with clear purpose and direction. She envied their certainty. She felt like debris scattered in their productive wake. The sun climbed steadily higher, forcing her to seek inadequate shade beneath the depot's narrow overhang. From her vantage point, she could observe the cattle pens, where animals stamped and bellowed, raising thick clouds of red dust that painted everything the color of dried blood. One man stood distinctly apart from the others, and despite her overwhelming troubles, Clara Mae found herself watching him with growing fascination. He was impossibly tall. She estimated at least 6 feet 6 inches, with shoulders broad enough to carry the world's entire weight without complaint. His hair was silver gray beneath a thoroughly battered hat, and his deeply weathered face held a gentleness that seemed remarkably at odds with his imposing physical frame. He moved among the restless cattle with practiced, almost graceful ease, his voice low and soothing as he guided them through narrow gates with patient skill. There was something almost reverent in how he approached his work, as if he understood instinctively that these animals deserved respect and kindness, not merely efficient handling. When he paused to wipe accumulated sweat from his weathered brow, their eyes met across the dusty expanse. Neither looked away immediately, and in that brief moment, Clara Mae felt an unexpected connection that defied rational explanation. Then he touched his hat brim in polite acknowledgement before returning to his important work. Her empty stomach reminded her sharply that she hadn't eaten since yesterday's stale biscuits purchased at the last station. The small cafe beckoned invitingly, but every remaining penny counted now that her future had become so uncertain. The tall cowboy finished his demanding work as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the dusty ground. Instead of heading to the saloon with his laughing companions, he walked deliberately toward the depot, toward her. "Ma'am?" he said respectfully, touching his hat brim again with practiced courtesy. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel shifting in a riverbed. "I couldn't help but notice you've been waiting here since yesterday morning. Is everything quite all right?" The question, asked with such genuine concern and human kindness, nearly shattered her carefully maintained composure. "I'm quite well, thank you," she lied with borrowed dignity, lifting her chin with false confidence. "Just waiting patiently for the eastbound train to arrive." He studied her face intently with pale blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade with uncomfortable clarity. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but you look like someone who's recently had a serious run of exceptionally bad luck. I'm Gabriel Rivers. Most folks around these parts simply call me Gabriel." "Clara Mae," she replied, then added with bitter laughter that held no real humor. "Formerly of London, England, and more recently a mail-order bride who apparently didn't quite meet the required specifications." Understanding flickered immediately in his perceptive eyes. "Marcus Thornfield?" She nodded, genuinely surprised by his immediate comprehension of her situation. "Figured as much. I observed you talking to him yesterday afternoon, saw how that conversation ended too." His jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Marcus isn't necessarily a bad man, but he's developed very particular ideas about what constitutes a suitable wife, ideas that don't properly account for what truly matters in a life partner." "And what really matters, Mr. Rivers?" she asked, curious despite her emotional exhaustion. "Character," he replied without the slightest hesitation. "Genuine kindness. The inner strength required to weather life's inevitable storms without losing your essential goodness. Physical size has absolutely nothing to do with any of those crucial qualities." When had anyone ever spoken to her with such profound respect and understanding? "That's remarkably kind of you to say, but I'm afraid Mr. Thornfield's opinion was the only one that truly counted in this situation. I'll be returning to New York tomorrow morning." "To what exactly?" The unexpected question caught her completely off guard. "What are you actually returning to? Family members who care about you, steady work that provides fulfillment, a place that genuinely feels like home?" The painful truth was that she had absolutely nothing to return to in the East. No family members who cared, no available work, no place that felt remotely like home. Just a vague, desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she might eventually find a way to start over once again. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Clara Mae. There's an old line shack approximately 3 miles north of here, situated right on Willow Creek. I built it myself several years back, during the harsh winter of '78. It's not much to look at, just one room, a stone fireplace, and a solid roof, but it's structurally sound and completely dry. You're welcome to stay there while you figure out your next move." I couldn't possibly accept such extraordinary generosity from a complete stranger, she protested, though her heart leaped at the unexpected offer. Why not? He asked reasonably. Seems to me you could use a safe, quiet place to rest properly and think clearly about your options. And I could certainly use the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're not spending another night sleeping on uncomfortable train station benches. But what would people think? A woman alone accepting shelter from a man she's just met. His smile was gentle and understanding. People will think whatever they want to think, Miss Clara Mae. The important question is, what do you think? Do you trust me not to harm you or take advantage of your vulnerable situation? She searched his deeply weathered face carefully for any sign of deception or hidden motives. What she discovered instead was sincerity so profound and genuine, it literally took her breath away. This imposing man could have easily intimidated her with his size and strength, but instead he was offering exactly what she needed most desperately, a chance to catch her breath and regain her bearings. Yes, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe I do trust you completely, Mr. Rivers. The abandoned line shack sat like a forgotten prayer on Willow Creek's peaceful banks, its weathered logs silver gray in the fading evening light. One modest room with a stone chimney and windows as small as afterthoughts. After spending a miserable night on the depot bench, it looked like an absolute palace to Clara Mae's grateful eyes. Built this place in '78, Gabriel explained, unlocking the sturdy door with a key he produced from his vest pocket. Needed reliable shelter for line riders watching the herds during the harsh winter months. Spent 3 solid weeks getting every single log positioned just right. Inside, dust motes danced gracefully in the last golden sunlight streaming through the small windows. The furnishings were sparse but entirely functional. A stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a simple bed frame that had seen better days. It's absolutely perfect, Clara Mae declared, meaning it completely and without reservation. Gabriel seemed genuinely surprised by her enthusiastic reaction. It's been sitting empty for 3 long years. It needs thorough cleaning, fresh bedding, and basic provisions. I can ride into town tomorrow morning and get whatever you need. Mr. Rivers, why are you helping me like this? You don't know anything about me. You owe me absolutely nothing. The direct question seemed to catch him off guard. He removed his battered hat, running weathered fingers through his silver hair. For a brief moment, she glimpsed profound loneliness in his expression, a loneliness that matched her own. I know exactly what it's like to be completely alone in this world, he said finally, his voice heavy with remembered pain. To have nowhere to turn, no one who genuinely cares whether you live or die. I wouldn't wish that terrible feeling on my worst enemy, let alone a decent woman who's done nothing wrong. But surely you have family, friends who care about you? No, ma'am. Lost both my parents to fever when I was just 16 years old. Been entirely on my own ever since. He gestured toward the modest cabin with a sweep of his arm. This place has been empty far too long. Seems absolutely right that someone should make proper use of it. As firelight filled the small space with dancing shadows that evening, Clara Mae experienced something she hadn't felt in many long months. A genuine sense of belonging. The cabin wasn't hers and would never legally be hers, but it offered exactly what she needed most: safety and blessed solitude. 3 peaceful days passed in comfortable routine. Gabriel brought necessary supplies without being asked. She mended his work clothes with careful attention to detail, and they talked together like old friends who had known each other for years rather than days. But paradise never lasts long when gossips have sharp tongues and too much time on their hands. Had some visitors today, Gabriel announced one afternoon, obvious tension visible in his broad shoulders. Mrs. Prudence Whitmore from the Church Ladies' Auxiliary. Word has gotten around town about your situation here. Clara Mae's stomach clenched with familiar dread. What exactly did she say? Nothing particularly pleasant, I'm afraid. Some folks apparently think it's highly improper for an unmarried woman to be living out here alone, accepting help from an unmarried man. They're quite concerned about appearances and what people might think. And what do you think about appearances, Mr. Rivers? His pale eyes flashed with genuine anger. I think Mrs. Whitmore and her self-righteous friends would rather see you sleeping in the street than risk even a whisper of scandal. They're far more concerned with idle gossip than with Christian charity. But their concerns aren't entirely without merit, Clara Mae said quietly, ever the voice of reason. I am indeed a woman alone, accepting shelter from a man I've known less than a week. In so-called proper society, Gabriel interrupted with obvious frustration, proper society would have left you stranded at that depot without a second thought, would have let you starve rather than risk a single raised eyebrow. The vehemence in his voice genuinely surprised her. You're truly angry about this. Damn right I'm angry, he declared without apology. These same women who are so concerned about propriety, where exactly were they when you desperately needed help? Where was their much vaunted Christian charity when you were sleeping on depot benches? 2 weeks later, while organizing papers Gabriel had left behind, Clara Mae discovered something that changed everything she thought she knew. Among routine invoices and correspondence was a land deed. Not for a small homestead, but for 2,000 acres of prime Wyoming territory. The name on the official deed read, Gabriel Rivers, landowner. Her heart pounded frantically as understanding slowly dawned. He wasn't just a kind ranch hand helping a stranger in need. He was wealthy, powerful, one of the territory's most successful ranchers, and he had been living in that modest line shack, pretending to be someone he wasn't. When he arrived that evening as usual, she was waiting with the deed clutched in her trembling hands. You lied to me, she said without preamble, her voice shaking with emotion. His weathered face went pale. Clara Mae, I can explain. 2,000 acres, Gabriel. 2,000 acres. You're not some drifting cowboy with a good heart. You're one of the biggest landowners in the entire territory. Why didn't you tell me the truth? He sat heavily in the chair across from her, suddenly looking older than his years. Because I've learned through bitter experience that people see wealth before they see the man underneath. I wanted you to know me first, the real me. The real you. Her voice rose with hurt and confusion. Which part was real? The humble cowboy or the wealthy rancher? Both, he said quietly but firmly. The money came from years of backbreaking hard work, smart investments, and some lucky breaks along the way. But it didn't change who I am inside. I'm still the same man who lost his parents young, who's been alone most of his life, who saw a woman in desperate need and wanted to help. But you let me think. I let you think I was someone worth knowing for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with what I own, he interrupted. And wasn't I right? Haven't these weeks meant something significant to you? The question hung between them like a challenge, because the truth was they had meant something, more than she had expected, more than she had been prepared for. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered, tears threatening to fall. Believe this, he said earnestly, leaning forward. Every moment we've spent together, every conversation, every shared meal, that was completely real. The only thing I hid was the size of my bank account. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced another visitor. Judge Theodore Mason, the territorial judge, dismounted with the gravity of a man carrying weighty news. Miss Clara Mae, he said formally, removing his hat with practiced courtesy, I've come to discuss your current situation. There's been considerable talk in town, and I'm afraid if you don't regularize your circumstances soon, there could be serious legal consequences. What kind of consequences? Gabriel asked, stepping protectively closer to Clara Mae. Vagrancy charges, moral turpitude. The ladies' auxiliary is quite determined to see this matter resolved properly and according to social conventions. After the judge departed, Clara Mae walked slowly to the creek, needing space to think clearly. The water murmured peacefully over smooth stones, indifferent to human complications. She had been living a lie without knowing it, accepting charity from a man who could buy and sell half the territory. But had it truly been charity, or had it been something else entirely? She found herself remembering small, precious moments, the way he had carved that wooden spoon with such careful attention, how he had noticed she needed buttons for his shirts, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his lost parents. Had any of that been false? When she returned to the cabin, she found Gabriel waiting on the porch, something small wrapped in cloth in his large hands. "Before you say anything," he began, "I want you to know I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness, but I need you to understand something important." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age and handling. "This was my mother's wedding ring, the only thing of hers I kept after she died. I've carried it for 20 years, never thinking I'd have reason to offer it to anyone." He knelt before her chair, the ring balanced carefully on his weathered palm. "I'm not asking you to marry me because of the gossips or the judge or anyone else. I'm asking because somewhere during these past weeks, you've become the home I never thought I'd have. The wealth, it's just money, Clara Mae. But you're everything I didn't know I was looking for." Tears blurred her vision. "How do I know what's real anymore?" "Let me show you," he said, standing and extending his hand. "Come with me." He led her to a ridge overlooking the valley where the setting sun painted the landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. There, barely begun but unmistakable in its purpose, stood the wooden frame of a house. "I started building this the day after you agreed to stay," he said quietly. "Not because I expected anything, but because I hoped. I hoped you might find a reason to make Wyoming your permanent home." "You were building me a house?" "I was building us a future, if you'll have it." She looked at the house, then at the ring still resting in his palm, then at his face, weathered by years of solitude but transformed by hope. "The ring?" she said quietly. "What does it come with?" "No conditions, only love. Only the promise that whatever I have is yours, not because you need it, but because you deserve it." The wedding was beautifully simple. A ceremony under a pine bough arch, with Judge Mason officiating and a handful of witnesses who had come to respect the quiet woman who had found her place in their harsh territory. Clara Mae wore the blue dress Gabriel had bought her that first day, now altered to fit perfectly. He wore his best shirt, the one she had mended so carefully weeks before. They shared their first coffee as husband and wife in the same battered tin cup they had used in the line shack. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as they sat on the porch of their cabin, now truly theirs. "I've been ready my whole life," she replied with absolute certainty. "I just didn't know it." Their life together developed its own peaceful rhythm. They worked side by side on the ranch, Clara Mae's seamstress skills growing into a thriving business as word spread about her exceptional quality work. Their love deepened through daily acts of respect and devotion. Shared meals, quiet conversations, the simple pleasure of companionship after years of crushing solitude. 6 months later, spring arrived with a rush of green across the Wyoming prairie. Their garden flourished magnificently. Roses bloomed against the cabin walls, and their bond had only deepened with time. Sitting on the porch in the rocking chairs Gabriel had built with his own hands, they watched the sun set over land that stretched endlessly to the horizon. "Any regrets?" Gabriel asked, his weathered hand finding hers. "Only that it took me 56 years to find you," Clara Mae replied with a contented smile. The woman who had been rejected on a train platform for being too small had become the heart of a ranch that employed dozens of people. Her sewing skills had made her one of the territory's most successful businesswomen. But more than that, she had become the center of a love story that proved worth isn't measured in size or strength, but in the courage to remain kind, in a world that often isn't. As coyotes began their evening song across the vast prairie, Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For trusting a stranger, for seeing past the lies to the truth underneath, for making this old cowboy believe in happy endings." "Thank you," she replied, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." The stars emerged one by one above Wyoming's vast sky, and Clara Mae Rivers, no longer small, no longer alone, finally understood what home really meant.